My 38-year-old neighbor knocked at midnight, and in just 10 minutes, he changed my life. Because what he told me that night rewrote everything I believed about love. The digital clock on Sarah's laptop glowed 11:47 p.m. as she stared at the blank Photoshop canvas, her third cup of coffee growing cold beside a stack of unpaid bills. The December wind rattled her apartment windows, and the Denver skyline twinkled through the frost-covered glass like distant stars she could never reach. 3 months since the divorce papers were signed, and she still felt like she was drowning in the silence of her one-bedroom apartment. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and pushed away from her desk. The creative block had been suffocating her for weeks. Every client project felt like climbing Mount Everest with lead weights strapped to her ankles. Her portfolio, once vibrant with innovative designs, now felt stale and uninspired. Even worse, her savings account was dwindling faster than snow in spring sunshine. She wandered to the kitchen, stepping over cardboard boxes she still hadn't unpacked. Moving to this quiet Lakewood neighborhood had seemed like a fresh start 6 months ago, but isolation had crept in like morning fog. Her neighbors were polite but distant, quick waves in the parking lot, brief smiles in the mailroom. She knew their faces but not their names, their routines but not their stories. The apartment next door had been particularly mysterious. She'd noticed the tall Asian man who lived there kept odd hours, often leaving before dawn and returning well past midnight. His apartment was usually dark, except for a single lamp that glowed in what she assumed was his bedroom. Sometimes she heard classical music playing softly through the thin walls, always Chopin nocturnes that seemed to match her own restless nights. Sarah poured herself a glass of water and was heading back to her computer when 3 sharp knocks echoed through her apartment. Her hand froze on the glass. Who knocked at midnight? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the door, peering through the peephole. It was him, her mysterious neighbor. But something was wrong. His usually neat black hair was disheveled, his medical scrubs were wrinkled, and there was an urgency in his posture that made her stomach clench with worry. She could see his breath forming small clouds in the cold hallway air. "Sarah?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'm David, your neighbor. I know this is strange, but I really need your help." Her hand hesitated on the deadbolt. Every instinct her mother had drilled into her screamed not to open the door to a stranger at midnight, but something in his voice, a controlled desperation like a dam about to break, made her turn the lock. David Chen stood in her doorway, his dark eyes intense but kind. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged despite his attempt to stand straight. His hospital ID badge read, "David Chen, MD, Emergency Medicine." "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," he began, his words rushing together. "I know we've never properly met, but I've seen your lights on every night and I need to ask you something that might sound crazy." Sarah tightened her grip on the door handle. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "There's been an accident," David said, his voice catching slightly. "A family down the street. The Johnsons in the blue house. Their daughter Emma was hit by a car. She's at Presbyterian St. Joseph right now, stable but scared. The thing is," he paused, running a shaky hand through his hair, "her parents are asking for you." "Me?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand. I don't even know them." David's eyes held a mixture of urgency and something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation masked as professionalism. "You do know them, Sarah. You just don't realize it yet." The hallway seemed to tilt slightly as Sarah processed his words. The familiar weight of confusion settled in her chest, the same feeling she'd carried for months, like everyone else had a manual for life that she'd never received. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, something nagged at the edges of her memory. David stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the hospital antiseptic clinging to his scrubs and see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "Emma Johnson, 8 years old, loves to draw. She talks about the pretty lady with the sad eyes who waves at her from the window every morning when she waits for the school bus." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The little girl with pigtails and a bright yellow backpack. The one who always smiled and waved enthusiastically while Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her morning coffee, usually still in her pajamas from another sleepless night. The child's boundless energy had been a small bright spot in Sarah's gray mornings, though she'd never thought the girl actually noticed her. "Emma draws pictures of you," David continued, his voice softer now. "Her mom, Lisa, mentioned it to me a few months ago when we ran into each other at King Soopers. She said her daughter was fascinated by the artist lady next door who stayed up late working on beautiful pictures. Lisa saw some of your design work through your window one evening and recognized your talent." I had no idea, Sarah whispered, her hand moving unconsciously to her heart. The isolation she'd wrapped around herself like armor suddenly felt less protective and more like a prison of her own making. When the accident happened tonight, Emma kept asking for the nice drawing lady through her tears, David explained. She said you looked lonely like her when she couldn't sleep during thunderstorms. Lisa thought maybe you'd be willing to come to the hospital. Not as a stranger, but as someone Emma considers a friend. The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. This child, this bright, observant little girl, had been seeing her, really seeing her, all these months when Sarah felt invisible to the world. While Sarah had been drowning in self-pity and isolation, someone had been watching her with the pure, uncomplicated affection that only children possessed. "Is she going to be okay?" Sarah asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to her. David's shoulders relaxed slightly. "She has a broken leg and some bruises, but yes, she'll be fine." The car was going slowly. Black ice, not reckless driving. But she's scared, and sometimes in trauma situations, children need familiar faces, even if those faces belong to people they've only observed from a distance. Sarah looked past David toward the stairwell, imagining little Emma lying in a hospital bed, asking for her. The girl who had noticed Sarah's late-night work sessions, who had drawn pictures of her, who had somehow seen through the window into Sarah's lonely heart, and decided it was worth caring about. "I don't know what to say to her," Sarah admitted. "I'm not good with kids. I barely know how to take care of myself these days." David's expression softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw past his professional demeanor to the exhausted man beneath. "You don't have to say anything profound. Sometimes just showing up is enough. Emma sees something in you that maybe you can't see in yourself right now." The hallway was quiet except for the distant hum of heating units and the soft whistle of wind through the building's ventilation system. Sarah thought about all the mornings she'd waved at Emma while feeling like a ghost haunting her own life, never imagining that her simple gesture was making a difference to someone else. "Give me 5 minutes to change clothes," Sarah said finally. David's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of fatigue and revealing the kind, determined man who had chosen to spend his life helping others. "Thank you, Sarah. You have no idea what this means to her family." But as Sarah closed the door and rushed to find appropriate clothes, she realized that David was wrong. She was beginning to understand exactly what this meant, not just to Emma's family, but to herself. The drive to Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital took 12 minutes through the empty Denver streets, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of David's Honda Civic, watching the city blur past in streaks of orange streetlights and neon signs. The car smelled faintly of coffee and the leather jacket draped over the back seat, and classical music played softly from the radio, the same Chopin nocturnes she'd heard through their shared wall. "I should have introduced myself months ago," David said, breaking the comfortable silence as they turned onto Federal Boulevard. His hands gripped the steering wheel with the steady precision of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "I kept meaning to, especially after Lisa mentioned Emma's drawings of you, but hospital schedules are—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Sarah studied his profile in the dashboard light. There were laugh lines around his eyes despite the exhaustion, and a small dimple appeared when he concentrated. "I'm not exactly the most approachable neighbor myself," she admitted. "I've been pretty much a hermit since my divorce." "Divorce is rough," David said simply, without the awkward sympathy most people offered. "I went through one 5 years ago. It's like learning to breathe underwater. You think you're drowning until suddenly you realize you're not." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Sarah had grown accustomed to people either avoiding the topic entirely or offering generic platitudes about everything happening for a reason. "Does it get easier?" "Different," David replied as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. "Not easier or harder, just different. You learn to trust yourself again eventually." The hospital lobby was a study in institutional calm, muted blue walls, soft lighting, and the quiet efficiency of night shift staff moving through their routines. Sarah had always hated hospitals, the antiseptic smell, and the way voices echoed off polished floors. But walking beside David, she felt less like a visitor and more like someone with a purpose. "Dr. Chen," the desk nurse called out as they approached the elevator bank. "Emma's been asking for you every 10 minutes. David's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Maria, this is Sarah Martinez, Emma's friend from the neighborhood." Maria's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Ah, the artist. Emma described your window drawings perfectly. 3rd floor, room 314. Fair warning, she's been practicing her Spanish to impress you." As the elevator climbed, Sarah's nervousness returned. What if Emma took one look at her and realized she'd made a mistake? What if the child's image of the nice drawing lady was better than the reality of Sarah's current state? Rumpled clothes thrown on in haste, no makeup, hair still carrying the scent of too much coffee and not enough sleep? She's going to love meeting you properly, David said, as if reading her thoughts. Emma has an artist's eye. She sees things other people miss. Room 314 was bathed in soft light, and Sarah could hear quiet voices before they even reached the doorway. A woman with shoulder-length brown hair and worried eyes sat beside a hospital bed where a small figure lay propped up against pillows, her leg elevated in a cast that already bore several colorful signatures. "Emma, honey, look who Dr. David brought to see you." The woman, Lisa, said softly. Sarah's breath caught as Emma turned toward them. The little girl's face was pale with exhaustion, and there was a small bandage on her forehead, but her eyes lit up with pure joy when she saw Sarah. "You came!" Emma exclaimed, trying to sit up straighter in bed. "I knew you would. I told Mommy you were sad like me sometimes, but you're also brave." "Brave?" Sarah moved closer to the bed, her heart swelling at the child's enthusiasm. "You work all night making beautiful things even when you're sad," Emma explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom that only children possessed. "I watched you through your window. When I couldn't sleep, I'd see your light on, and I knew someone else was awake too. It made me feel less alone." Lisa Johnson stood up, extending her hand to Sarah. "I'm Lisa. I can't thank you enough for coming." Emma was so frightened, but when Dr. Chen said he might be able to find you, her voice wavered with emotion. "I'm just sorry we haven't met properly before now," Sarah said, accepting Lisa's warm handshake. "I had no idea Emma even noticed me." "Notice you?" Emma giggled despite her obvious discomfort. "I drew like a million pictures of you. Mommy, show her the folder." Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, handing it to Sarah with a shy smile. "Emma insisted I bring these when Dr. Chen mentioned you might come." Sarah opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were dozens of crayon drawings, all of her, sitting at her window with her laptop, surrounded by swirls of color that could only be the art streaming from her imagination in a child's interpretation. In Emma's drawings, Sarah wasn't isolated or lonely. She was magical, creating beauty in the darkness. "This is how you see me?" Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she flipped through the artwork. "That's how you really are," Emma said firmly. "You just forgot for a while." Sarah spent the next hour sitting beside Emma's bed, listening to the 8-year-old's chatter about school, her art projects, and her dreams of becoming a real artist like Sarah someday. David had been called away to handle another emergency, but not before sharing a meaningful look with Sarah that spoke of gratitude and something deeper, a recognition between two people who understood what it meant to help heal others. "Can you teach me how to draw on computers?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching for Sarah's. "I tried to use Daddy's laptop once, but I accidentally deleted his work files." She giggled at the memory, then grew serious. "Mommy said you make pictures for companies to help them look pretty." Sarah squeezed Emma's hand gently. The child's fingers were warm and slightly sticky from the apple juice the nurses had brought her. "I'd love to teach you. Maybe when your leg is better, you could come over and I could show you some basic design programs." "Really?" Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "Mommy, did you hear? Sarah's going to teach me computer art." Lisa smiled from her chair in the corner, where she'd been quietly watching the interaction between her daughter and their mysterious neighbor. "I think that sounds wonderful, if Sarah doesn't mind having a very enthusiastic student." "The best artists are enthusiastic," Sarah said, surprised by how naturally the conversation flowed. She hadn't talked to anyone this openly in months, yet here she was, making plans and commitments that extended beyond her self-imposed isolation. "Sarah," Emma said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "are you lonely like I thought?" The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. She glanced at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "I've been going through some changes in my life, and I guess I forgot how good it feels to talk to people. My teacher says that when we're sad, we should tell someone about it instead of keeping it inside like a secret," Emma said wisely. "She says secrets get heavy if you carry them too long." "Your teacher sounds very smart." "She is. And she said that sometimes when we help other people, it helps us feel better too. Like when I helped Tommy find his glasses on the playground, I felt happy even though I was having a bad day." Sarah felt a shift somewhere deep in her chest, like a door that had been locked for months suddenly creaking open. "You know what, Emma? I think your teacher is absolutely right." David returned to the room carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a tired but satisfied smile. "Good news," he announced. "Emma's x-rays look perfect, and Dr. Peterson says she can go home in the morning if she has a good night." "Yay!" Emma clapped her hands together. Sarah, will you come visit me at home? I want to show you my art supplies, and Mommy makes really good cookies. I would love that, Sarah said, meaning it completely. As visiting hours wound down, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave. The warmth of this small hospital room, filled with genuine connection and care, felt more like home than her apartment had in months. When it was time to go, Emma hugged her tightly, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for not being too scared to be my friend." David walked Sarah back to his car in comfortable silence. The December air was crisp and clean, and the parking garage echoed with the distant sounds of the city continuing its rhythm beyond the hospital walls. "That was incredible," Sarah said as they settled into the car. "I can't believe how much she sees, how much she understands." "Children are remarkable that way," David agreed, starting the engine. "They don't carry around all the baggage that makes adults afraid to connect with each other." As they drove through the quiet streets back to their apartment building, Sarah watched the familiar landmarks take on new meaning. The coffee shop where she'd been buying her morning caffeine fix for months suddenly seemed like a place where she might actually sit and read instead of rushing back to her isolation. The small park where she'd seen Lisa and Emma playing on weekends looked like somewhere she might walk, instead of just observing from her window. "David," she said as they pulled into their parking lot, "can I ask you something? Why did you become a doctor?" He turned off the engine and considered the question seriously. "Honestly, because I needed to believe that broken things could be fixed. After my divorce, after feeling like I'd failed at something so fundamental, I needed work that reminded me daily that healing was possible." "And does it? Remind you, I mean?" David smiled, and in the dim light of the parking garage, Sarah could see the peace in his expression. "Every day. Sometimes the healing is physical, sometimes it's emotional, and sometimes," he looked at her meaningfully, "it's about helping people remember they're not as alone as they think they are." They sat in the car for another moment, neither ready to break the connection that had formed during this unexpected night. Finally, David spoke again. "Sarah, would you like to have dinner sometime? Not as neighbors making polite conversation, but as friends who've been through some of the same struggles?" Sarah felt her heart skip, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. "I'd like that very much." As they walked together toward their building, Sarah realized that in the span of a few hours, her entire perspective had shifted. She was still the same person with the same challenges, but she was no longer facing them alone. Sometimes, she thought, the most profound changes began with the simplest acts of courage. Opening a door, accepting help, allowing yourself to be seen. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her kitchen at 7:30 a.m., watching through her window as Emma waited for the school bus. But this time, instead of observing from the shadows of her morning routine, Sarah opened her window and called out, "Have a great day at school, Emma." The little girl looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile as she waved enthusiastically with both hands. "Sarah, look!" Emma held up her backpack, which now featured a small laminated printout of one of Sarah's digital designs, a colorful butterfly that Sarah had created specifically for her young friend. "Everyone at school thinks it's so cool." Lisa appeared beside Emma, coffee mug in hand, and waved up at Sarah. "Coffee later?" she called out. It had become their routine. After Emma left for school, the two women would meet at the small cafe down the street to discuss everything from Emma's latest art projects to Sarah's slowly recovering design business. "Absolutely," Sarah replied. "I have something exciting to show you." As the yellow school bus pulled away, Sarah felt the familiar warmth that had been growing stronger each day since that midnight knock that changed everything. Her apartment, once a fortress of isolation, had transformed into a home base for an expanding circle of connections. The unpacked boxes were finally empty. The walls now displayed not only her own work, but also Emma's colorful drawings. And the kitchen table had become a gathering place for impromptu dinners with David and the Johnsons. Her laptop chimed with an email notification, and Sarah smiled as she read the subject line: "Project Approval, Community Arts Center Branding Package." The proposal she'd submitted 3 days ago had been accepted. After weeks of creative drought, her inspiration had returned with a vengeance, fueled by her rediscovered connection to her community and her sense of purpose. The project was perfect for her, designing marketing materials for a local arts center that provided free classes to underprivileged children. It combined her professional skills with her newfound passion for making art accessible to kids like Emma. The pay was modest, but it was honest work that aligned with her values, and it came with the possibility of teaching a weekly design class for teenagers. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and Sarah smiled as she recognized the gentle rhythm. David had developed his own signature knock, 3 soft raps followed by 2 quick ones. that had become as familiar and welcome as morning coffee. "Good morning," he said when she opened the door, holding up a paper bag from their favorite bakery. "I brought Danish pastries and a proposition." "I love Danish pastries," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm more cautious about propositions." David laughed, the sound rich and warm in her kitchen. Over the past 2 weeks, their friendship had deepened naturally, built on shared late-night conversations, collaborative efforts to help Emma with her art projects, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to rebuild your life after loss. There was an attraction between them that neither had rushed to explore, content to let it develop at the pace of genuine friendship first. "The hospital is organizing a fundraiser for the children's wing," David explained, settling into his usual spot at her kitchen table. "We need someone to design promotional materials, and I immediately thought of you. It would be paid work, but more importantly, it would be meaningful work." Sarah poured coffee for both of them, her mind already racing with design possibilities. "Tell me more." "We're calling it Healing Through Art. The idea is to raise money for a dedicated art therapy room where kids can express themselves creatively during their recovery. Emma actually gave me the idea when she mentioned how much drawing helped her feel better after the accident." "David, that's incredible," Sarah said, sitting across from him. "I would love to work on something like that." "There's more," David continued, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "If the fundraiser is successful, they want to hire a part-time art coordinator to run programs in the new space, someone who understands both design and working with children." Sarah felt her heart skip. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the universe has a funny way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time," David said softly. "You've already proven how good you are with Emma, and your design skills are exactly what the program would need." Before Sarah could respond, another knock echoed through the apartment, this one the enthusiastic banging that could only belong to Emma Johnson. Sarah opened the door to find the 8-year-old standing in the hallway with Lisa, both of them grinning mysteriously. "Surprise!" Emma announced, holding up a large, flat package wrapped in colorful paper. "We brought you something." "But it's not my birthday," Sarah protested, even as she welcomed them inside. "It doesn't have to be your birthday to give someone a present," Emma explained with the logic of childhood. "Sometimes you give presents just because you want someone to know they're special." Sarah carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a framed collage of photographs, pictures of her and Emma working on art projects together, shots of their coffee dates with Lisa, candid photos from the dinner parties that had become a weekly tradition with David. In the center was Emma's original drawing of Sarah at her window, but now it was surrounded by new artwork showing Sarah laughing, teaching, and surrounded by friends. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Lisa helped me make it," Emma said proudly. "But it was my idea. I wanted to show you how different you look now than when I first drew you." Sarah studied the collage more closely. Emma was right. The recent photos showed a woman who looked lighter, more present, genuinely happy. The isolation and sadness that had characterized her life 3 weeks ago had been replaced by engagement and joy. "Emma, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me," Sarah said, hugging the little girl tightly. "Dr. David helped too," Emma confided. "He took most of the pictures." Sarah looked up at David, who shrugged with a slightly embarrassed smile. "I wanted to document the transformation," he said simply. As they sat around Sarah's kitchen table sharing Danish pastries and discussing plans for the hospital fundraiser, Sarah marveled at how completely her life had changed. The creative block that had paralyzed her for months was gone, replaced by more project ideas than she could possibly pursue. Her bank account was stabilizing thanks to new clients who had found her through word-of-mouth recommendations from Lisa and David. Most importantly, the crushing loneliness that had defined her existence was now just a memory. "You know," Lisa said, refilling everyone's coffee cups, "Emma was right about you from the beginning. She told me weeks before the accident that the sad lady in the window just needed friends." "How did she know that?" Sarah asked, looking at Emma with amazement. Emma considered the question seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Because that's what I needed too sometimes. When I was sad or scared, having friends made everything better. I figured it worked the same for grown-ups." "Out of the mouths of babes," David murmured, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. As the morning progressed and her friends eventually left to attend to their own responsibilities, Sarah remained at her kitchen table, looking out the window that had once been her only connection to the outside world. Now it was simply one of many ways she engaged with her community, as a neighbor, friend, artist, and soon, hopefully, as someone who helped other children discover their creative voices. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tonight?" I'm cooking, and Emma specifically requested that you bring your laptop to show her your latest designs. Sarah typed back quickly, "Wouldn't miss it. Thank you for knocking on my door that night." His response came immediately. "Thank you for opening it." Sometimes the best things in life start with taking a chance on a stranger. But as Sarah looked around her transformed apartment, filled with evidence of new friendships and creative projects, she realized that David was wrong about one thing. He hadn't been a stranger that night. He had been exactly what she needed. A neighbor who cared enough to notice when someone was struggling, brave enough to reach out across the divide of unfamiliarity, and patient enough to help her remember who she really was, beneath the layers of hurt and isolation. Sarah opened her laptop and began working on her first sketches for the Healing Through Art campaign, her fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed purpose. Outside her window, life in her neighborhood continued its gentle rhythm, but now she was part of that rhythm instead of merely observing it. Sometimes, she thought as she lost herself in her work, the most profound changes really did begin with a simple knock at the door. The key was being brave enough to answer.